I should have noticed the signs earlier, how Luca insisted I wear the red dress, the one he'd picked out for me weeks ago, and left hanging in my closet with a note that said, "Wear this tonight, trust me." But before we see how the story unfolds, tell me where you're watching from. Now, hit that subscribe button and let's dive in. At 27, I had learned to choose my battles, and tonight, this one felt too insignificant. What mattered was the night, the celebration of the promise we'd made to each other, our engagement. The Bellissima restaurant, perched atop the finest building in the city, should have been the perfect backdrop for such a moment. But instead of feeling like the beginning of forever, it had an unfamiliar edge. I walked through the grand entrance, my heels tapping against the polished marble floors, the soft, almost imperceptible murmurs of Manhattan's elite swirling around me. The chandeliers hung like crystal rainbows, and the entire city skyline stretched out before us, glittering like a promise. I had been here before, at my own corporate celebration after I was promoted at the firm. Luca had complained about the cost then, too, but tonight, he made the reservation himself. And as I entered, a subtle tension started to coil inside me. "Miss Collins, your party is already seated," the maitre d' said with an impassive smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Your party, not your fiancé." That should have been my second warning, but I didn't listen. I followed him through the elegantly lit dining room, trying to shake the strange feeling prickling at the back of my neck. The Bellissima wasn't just a restaurant. It was a world unto itself, where the richest people in the city came to see and be seen. I recognized faces from fashion magazines, charity galas, and power dinners. 200 people, dressed in designer suits, their diamonds shimmering like the sun. Luca was seated at the center of it all, under the largest chandelier, right where he always liked to be, visible. But there was someone else sitting in my chair, someone who shouldn't have been there. Sophia Blackwell. Her blonde hair cascaded in perfect waves down her back, her designer dress sparkling with an elegance that made my stomach twist. I knew her by reputation, wealthy, powerful, and poised to take over the family empire. She was everything I wasn't, and everything Luca seemed to want. I stopped dead, 3 feet from their table, as the weight of the evening pressed against my chest. My hands tightened around the folder I was carrying, blueprints for a project I'd worked tirelessly on, my next big step in my career. Luca stood up, his face carefully neutral, as though he hadn't just destroyed everything I thought we had. "Ava, thank you for coming," he said, his voice cold. Not the warm greeting I expected, but the detached formality of a business associate. "What is this?" My voice barely reached my ears, steadier than I felt. Luca gestured to the empty seat beside Sophia. "Please sit, we need to talk." I didn't move. Every part of me screamed to leave, to walk away before the truth cut through me, but pride locked my legs in place. I couldn't let him see me break. Not here, not in front of everyone. Luca glanced at Sophia, and she nodded. Then he cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about our future," he said, looking at me with that emotionless stare. "I've come to realize that what I need in a partner isn't what you can offer. I need someone who understands the pressures of this world, who's been born into it. I'm planning to expand my company internationally, and the right partner can make all the difference. Sophia here," he gestured to her with a careless hand, "understands the business world, the politics, the influence. She's the right partner for me." The words hit me like physical blows. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. My thoughts were clouded, but I understood what he was saying. He was choosing her over me. My mind raced, trying to comprehend it. "You brought me here to break up with me," I said flatly, the shock and pain of it sinking in. Luca didn't hesitate. "Yes." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a velvet box. "This is over." He opened the box, revealing the engagement ring, the one I'd left in his bathroom when it had started to irritate my finger. He'd promised to take it to the jeweler to have it resized. Now he was returning it to me, setting it on the table like it meant nothing. "I think it's best if we make a clean break," Luca continued, his words robotic. "You're ambitious, Ava. I admire that. But people might say you were with me for what I could offer you, your career, your place in the company." The room seemed to spin around me as he spoke. "You went from a junior associate to head of marketing in less than 6 months after we became engaged. People talk." Sophia leaned forward, her smile almost sweet. "It's nothing personal, darling. Luca just needs someone who can help him climb higher, someone who understands this world." The words swirled around me as my blueprints slipped from my fingers, hitting the marble floor with a hollow thud. They scattered, my hard work, my future, lying at their feet like discarded paper. Luca didn't even glance at it. "You'll find someone more suited to your background," he said, dismissing me with a casual wave. "It's for the best." As the murmurs of the crowd began to swell, phones emerged from pockets and purses. Cameras flashed, capturing my destruction. I should have said something, should have delivered the perfect exit line. Instead, I bent down, my fingers trembling as I picked up my scattered blueprints. I stood up, my voice distant and detached. "Keep the ring," I said. "Consider it payment for the year I wasted." I turned, walking toward the door. Every step felt like it was dragging me through concrete. The conversations around me turned into a dull roar. I could hear the sympathetic murmurs, the smirks, the whispered gossip. They all knew what had happened. The cold night air hit me as I stepped out into the streets. My burgundy dress, chosen by Luca, did nothing to protect me from the chill. I stumbled down the block, tears welling in my eyes. I sank down on a nearby curb, the blueprints clutched to my chest, surrounded by shadows. The weight of the evening crashed over me, and the tears came, hot, burning, humiliating. Footsteps approached, but I didn't care. Let them see. Let them take their pictures. Nothing could make this worse. "Miss Collins." The voice was low, controlled, but completely unfamiliar. I looked up through blurred vision. A tall man stood 3 feet away, his face shadowed by the streetlights. His suit was dark, expensive, and he carried himself with an air of power that instantly put me on alert. But it was his eyes that held me captive, dark and intense, as if he saw straight through me. "I don't need help," I said, wiping my face, my voice hoarse. "I disagree." He stepped closer, his presence imposing. With those simple words, everything about my life was about to change. I had no idea who this man was, but his next offer would either pull me deeper into a world I wasn't ready for, or give me the chance to finally escape the wreckage of my old life. The night had been a disaster, a cruel public spectacle that left nothing of my dignity behind. Every step away from the Bellissima felt like a slow unraveling, each one a reminder of how easily I had been discarded. My engagement was over. My career, fragile and carefully constructed, was crumbling in front of my eyes. I could hear the whispers in my head, echoing the shame I felt, the judgment that would soon follow. The chilly October air did nothing to clear my mind. I still wore the dress Luca had insisted on, its red fabric too vibrant for the funeral of my dreams. I wiped my face again, trying to compose myself, but the tears came, hot and uncontrollable. My phone buzzed in my purse, an unholy distraction. I didn't want to look, but it buzzed again, and then again. Finally, I pulled it out, my fingers trembling as I swiped to unlock. The screen was filled with a flood of notifications, texts, missed calls, social media notifications, all confirming what I already knew. I was the latest subject of gossip. Some people expressed sympathy, Others were gloating, but all of them had witnessed my public humiliation. They'd all seen Alexander abandon me for Sophia, and now my personal heartbreak was everyone else's entertainment. I dropped the phone back into my bag, unable to stomach the onslaught any longer. The city around me blurred as I struggled to breathe past the weight in my chest. How had it all gone so wrong? How had I gone from the center of Alexander's world to discarded trash? My mind raced, circling around the impossible reality of the past few hours. I could barely recall the sharpness of Sophia's smile, or the coldness in Luca's eyes as he casually dismissed me. It was all a haze, until I heard the voice. "Miss Collins." I froze. The sound of my name, spoken with such cool authority, sent a shiver through me. It was deep, controlled, and completely unfamiliar. Slowly, I lifted my head, trying to focus through the tears blurring my vision. Standing before me, illuminated by the weak glow of a nearby streetlight, was a man, tall, commanding. His features were sharp and precise, as though he had been chiseled out of stone. His dark suit was expensive, but it wasn't the suit that caught my attention. It was his eyes. Dark brown, almost black. They fixed on me with an intensity that took my breath away. I swallowed, trying to steady myself as the weight of the situation hit me. "I don't need help," I muttered, swiping at my cheeks, my voice raw. "I disagree." His response was calm, almost dismissive. But there was something in the way he moved, in the way his gaze remained on me that made my heart race. The words didn't make sense. I didn't need help. I was fine. Or at least I was trying to convince myself that I was. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice sharper now, though still trembling. The man stepped closer, his movements smooth and purposeful. His gaze never left mine. "Luca Romano," he said, his voice low, rich, and carrying an unmistakable weight of power. "You don't know me, but I know you." The name hit me like a brick wall, though I couldn't place where I had heard it before. There was something familiar about it, but I couldn't bring myself to remember. Luca Romano, Mafia boss. He ran half the city's underground operations, construction, shipping, clubs, casinos. His reputation was infamous. Men like him didn't offer help. They demanded control. The fact that he was standing in front of me at this moment, on a random street corner, while my world was crashing down around me, made no sense. I took a step back, instinctively putting distance between us. "I don't want any part of whatever you're offering." He tilted his head, as if amused by my response. "You're in no position to turn away offers, Miss Collins. Not tonight." I hated the way he made me feel, how he made me feel small, insignificant, like a girl with no power left. Like the worst part of my life was still unfolding, and this man was the final twist in the tragedy. Luca's eyes softened, just slightly, as he observed me. "What if I told you I could help you rebuild?" he asked, his tone shifting to something far more persuasive. "What if I told you I could fix this, give you a way out of this mess, in exchange for a small favor?" I frowned, the last of my resolve breaking down. "You don't fix people like me. You break them." I spit the words, but they tasted like ash in my mouth. His lips quirked into a slight smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe you're right, but not this time. Not with you." "What are you saying?" I didn't want to ask the question, but I was drawn to the sound of his voice, to the subtle threat that hung in the air between us. "I'm offering you a business arrangement," Luca replied. "A marriage of convenience, 6 months, a legal contract. In exchange, I can protect you from the fallout of tonight, give you the resources to rebuild your reputation, your career, and I'll make sure Alexander's little career move is nothing but a distant memory. No one will remember him after I'm finished." I stared at him, my mind racing, a marriage of convenience. The words were surreal. I was still processing what had happened with Alexander, still reeling from the pain of his betrayal. And now this man, this ruthless, cold, powerful man, was offering me a way out. The cost? My dignity, my independence, my control. 6 months of my life, tethered to someone like Luca Romano, who could destroy me as easily as he had saved me. "Why would you do this?" I asked, my voice betraying my confusion. "Why would you help me? What's in it for you?" Luca's gaze turned calculating, almost distant as he looked past me, his jaw tightening. "I have my reasons, personal ones, but I'll make sure your reputation is restored. I'll ensure that you're untouchable. No one will dare speak against you, not after what I'll do to Alexander." I swallowed, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Was I really considering this? Was I so far gone that I would accept an offer from a mafia boss just to escape the wreckage of my life? The pull of desperation, of having no other options, was stronger than I cared to admit. I could feel the panic gnawing at my insides, the realization that without Luca's help, I might lose everything. Alexander had taken so much from me, my pride, my future, my sense of self. Wasn't it better to take control back in whatever way I could? I looked up at Luca, his eyes fixed on me, his expression unreadable. "What exactly do you want from me?" I asked, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. "A contract marriage," he repeated, his words clipped, as if I should already understand the gravity of the situation. 6 months, public appearances, a legal marriage. And in return, you'll have my protection. You'll have everything you need to rebuild your career, and you'll make sure Alexander never gets a second chance. The price was steep, but what did I have left to lose? "You're asking me to marry you, for business, for 6 months." "That's right," Luca confirmed. "No emotional attachments. You'll get what you need, and I'll get what I need. We both move forward from here, but on our terms. On my terms." It sounded insane. It felt insane. But with every passing second, it also seemed like my only option. A contract, a marriage, a temporary arrangement with the most dangerous man in New York. Was this my only way out, or was it the beginning of something much worse? "Do you want to hear the rest of the details, or should we end this conversation now?" Luca asked, his voice low, almost amused. I hesitated for a moment and then nodded. There was no turning back now. The destruction had already begun. It was time to build something new, even if it meant making a deal with the devil himself. As Luca laid out the terms, a strange sense of powerlessness gripped me, but I knew deep down that I was making a choice, one that would define the next 6 months of my life, for better or for worse. The following day felt like a blur, the echo of the night's humiliation still ringing in my ears. I hadn't slept. Not really. The cold city air, the weight of the past 24 hours, and the constant stream of messages from colleagues, friends, and family, each one a reminder of how much my life had changed in such a short time. My phone buzzed constantly, but I couldn't bring myself to open any of the notification. They all felt like more salt on an open wound. I had hoped that the morning would bring clarity, a sense of calm, maybe even a glimmer of hope. But instead, I felt the same gnawing emptiness inside me, the same overwhelming sense of loss. Alexander had taken everything from me, my engagement, my career, my dignity. And now, here I was, standing at the crossroads of my life, with a choice that seemed almost absurd. The offer from Luca Romano hung in the air like a shadow I couldn't escape. A contract marriage. 6 months of my life tied to a man who was as dangerous as he was enigmatic. His mafia connections were enough to send a chill down anyone's spine. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Luca's offer might be my only chance to salvage something from the wreckage Alexander had left behind. I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on my chest. I knew I had no other options. Alexander had already moved on, and the public fallout from his betrayal would follow me like a cloud for the rest of my life. My career was hanging by a thread. No one would take me seriously now. No one would believe that I hadn't been in it for the connections, for the reputation. Not when everything I had worked for had fallen apart so spectacularly. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I hesitated for a moment before standing and walking to the door. The man who stood on the other side was tall, well-dressed, and his eyes, those dark, piercing eyes, reminded me once again that he wasn't someone I could easily escape. Luca Romano. "Miss Collins," he said, his voice smooth, controlled. "I trust you're ready to discuss the terms of our agreement." I nodded, trying to suppress the nervous flutter in my chest. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let him enter. As he walked past me, I couldn't help but notice how effortlessly he filled the room with his presence. Luca exuded confidence, a kind of quiet power that made him impossible to ignore. His tailored suit seemed to carry the weight of authority, and every movement he made was precise, calculated. I couldn't help but feel like I was in the presence of someone who had the ability to control everything around him. "Shall we sit?" he asked, gesturing toward the living room. I followed him, my stomach tight with anticipation. I had agreed to meet him, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to make the decision. "Let's get straight to it," Luca said, settling into the armchair across from me. "The deal is simple. 6 months. A public marriage. We'll announce it within the week. You'll be my wife in the eyes of the public, and I'll ensure that you are protected from any further damage to your reputation. I'll also provide the resources necessary to help you rebuild your career. In exchange, I expect you to act as my wife in public, attend social events, and maintain the appearance of a normal married life." I listened intently, trying to keep my emotions in check. It was exactly what he had promised the night before, a business arrangement. But the more he spoke, the more I realized just how far I was about to go to fix the mess I was in. This wasn't just about the marriage. It was about everything I had worked for, my career, my future, my dignity. "And the terms?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Luca leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving mine. "No physical intimacy unless mutually agreed upon," he said. "I'm not asking for anything more than what's necessary to keep the facade of a marriage intact. No one needs to know what goes on behind closed doors, but we'll maintain the public appearance of a happy, successful couple. I'm not interested in complicating things with emotions. This is purely business." I swallowed hard. The words were cold, practical, but they also made sense. I didn't need him to love me. I didn't need him to care for me. I just needed him to help me rebuild what Alexander had destroyed. "And if I agree?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Then we proceed with the marriage," Luca said, his voice unwavering. "You'll be a part of my world, and I'll help you make sure Alexander's career is nothing but a distant memory. No one will remember him, and you'll have the chance to pick up the pieces of your life without the weight of public scrutiny hanging over you." I leaned back in my seat, processing everything. His offer was too tempting to refuse. What else did I have? A ruined reputation, a broken engagement, and a career on the verge of collapse. 6 months, I said quietly. "That's the deal." Luca's expression remained unreadable. 6 months. After that, we can go our separate ways, and you'll be free to live your life however you see fit. I'll ensure that no one ever connects your name with Alexander again. I didn't know if I believed him, but I knew that I had no other choice. There was something about Luca, something undeniable in the way he spoke, that made me think he could deliver on his promise. He was dangerous, yes, but he was also someone who had the power to change everything for me. "Okay," I said, my voice steady despite the unease that still lingered in my chest. "I agree to the deal." Luca nodded, his lips curving into a faint smile. "Wise choice, Miss Collins. You won't regret it." I stood up, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I had made my decision. There was no turning back now. My life, for the next 6 months, would be tied to Luca Romano, and while the thought of marrying a mafia boss terrified me, I knew it was the only way to rebuild everything I had lost. Luca stood as well, his expression softening just slightly. "You'll be safe with me," he said, "and I'll make sure you get everything you need. But remember, this is strictly business. We don't complicate things with emotions." I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I believed him. But as I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, I realized just how much control he had over everything. In this world, he was the one who called the shots, and I was just another player, forced to play by his rules. I had made my choice, and now there was no turning back. As the details of the contract marriage settled in, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of relief and dread. I had my way out. Now I just had to survive the next 6 months in Luca's world, a world where the rules were always changing and where nothing was as it seemed. The penthouse was everything I had imagined, and nothing I could have prepared myself for. When I had first agreed to Luca's proposal, I had anticipated a business arrangement, a cold, calculated transaction that would keep my life from unraveling. What I hadn't expected was the sheer scale of his world, how quickly it swallowed me up, and how far-reaching his influence was. The move from my modest apartment to Luca's luxurious penthouse was a jarring shift. The building stood at the top of Manhattan, its sleek glass walls reflecting the glittering skyline as though it belonged to another world altogether. I had barely finished unpacking my things when I was told, with quiet efficiency, that everything had already been arranged. The apartment itself felt like an oasis of cold perfection. Polished marble floors, sharp lines, and minimalistic furniture made it feel more like an art gallery than a home. Yet, there was something about it, a calculated elegance, a presence, that was undeniable. I spent my first days here in a fog, unable to shake the overwhelming feeling that I was out of place. But Luca had promised that in time I would settle in, and he was right. There was no room for hesitation in this world. I had to adapt or drown. Luca, of course, had already adapted. The penthouse was his domain, and the power he held over it, and everyone in it, was palpable. He moved through the space with an ease that came from total control. The subtle way he spoke to the staff, the way the room shifted when he entered it, even the way people deferred to him when he passed by, all underscored just how far-reaching his influence was. He commanded everything around him, and yet he treated me with a distant respect. We barely spoke when we were alone. Our interactions were polite, professional, as they had been when I first agreed to this arrangement. Luca kept to his word. No emotions, no strings attached. He was a businessman, and our marriage was a business deal. His behavior was always composed, and when he did speak, it was measured, careful. There was no warmth in his eyes, no hint of affection, and yet something about him drew me in. It was impossible not to notice the power he exuded, the way everything around him seemed to bend to his will, even the air itself. I attended my first event with him just days after moving in. The Garrison Gala, a charity event that drew New York's elite, was where the world would see us together for the first time. At the entrance, Luca took my arm in a way that was almost possessive, his hand warm and firm against my skin. His presence radiated confidence, and as we moved through the crowd, heads turned in our direction. The whispers, the appraising stares, were to be expected. I was his wife now, the newest addition to his collection of power moves, and everyone knew it. I could feel eyes on us the moment we entered the grand ballroom. The glittering chandeliers cast a soft glow over the crowd, a sea of designer dresses, sharp suits, and expensive jewelry. The air was thick with money, with status, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was intruding in this world. Luca seemed to glide through it effortlessly, exchanging pleasantries with people I recognized from magazines but could barely name. Each conversation he entered ended with a knowing handshake or a whispered promise, and the respect everyone showed him was unquestionable. I, on the other hand, felt like a ghost, someone who didn't belong. My dress, a sleek black number with a plunging neckline, was designed to make a statement, but the only thing I felt was out of place. I wasn't used to this level of scrutiny, this kind of attention. The weight of my new title, of Luca's wife, settled on my shoulders like an unwelcome cloak. As the night progressed, I began to notice the subtle ways in which Luca protected me. It wasn't overt, but it was there. His eyes scanning the room, his hand on my back guiding me away from uncomfortable situations, his voice lowering when he spoke to certain people, signaling to them that I was not to be trifled with. He didn't have to do any of it. No one would have dared challenge him. But I saw it in the way he moved, in the way he positioned himself between me and others who tried to get too close. It was small, but it was there. And it made me feel, for the first time since this arrangement began, like I was more than just a pawn in his game. Later that evening, as we left the gala, Luca's hand once again found mine, though this time it was softer, less commanding. The car ride back to the penthouse was quiet, the hum of the engine filling the silence between us. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to say something, if I was even allowed to question the nature of our arrangement. "You did well tonight," Luca said, breaking the silence. His voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it that made me sit up straighter. "Thank you," I replied, unsure of how to respond to such a simple compliment. It felt out of place. A part of me had expected nothing but cold business from him, but he was offering me something else, something that felt almost like approval. I couldn't tell if it was real or if he was just playing his part. We pulled into the penthouse's underground garage, the low rumble of the car's engine fading as we parked. "I know this isn't easy for you," Luca said as we exited the car, his voice more somber now, "but you've made a good choice." I wanted to say something, to ask him why he was doing this, to question the motives behind his actions, but there was something in the way he said it, something in his eyes that told me there was more to his offer than I would ever understand. "You don't need to worry about anything," he continued as we walked into the building. "I'll make sure no one touches you. No one can touch us as long as we keep up appearances. I've already dealt with Alexander." My heart skipped a beat. How? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he held the door open for me, his hand lingering on the handle for just a moment longer than necessary. "You'll find out soon enough," he said, his voice darkening. "But for now, all you need to know is that you're safe. No one will dare harm you, not while you're with me." I didn't respond. There was something in his words, in the way he spoke, that made my pulse quicken. Luca wasn't just controlling the situation, he was controlling me too. And I wasn't sure if I should be terrified or grateful. As we entered the penthouse, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The events of the night, the scrutiny, the whispers, the power that Luca wielded, it was all still there. But now I felt like I had some control too. I wasn't just a victim of Alexander's betrayal anymore. I was a player in a much bigger game. And whether I liked it or not, Luca was my partner. The days that followed were a blur of high society events, board meetings, and whispered conversations. I attended each event with Luca playing the role of his wife in public, but behind closed doors. Our marriage was a cold transaction. He didn't want anything more from me, and I wasn't sure I wanted more from him. But as time went on, I started to wonder if the lines between business and personal could really stay as clear as we had hoped. The first time I saw Alexander's name on the news again, it hit me like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't because I cared about him anymore, far from it. But the sheer satisfaction I felt, a dark, inexplicable sense of justice, made me pause and reconsider everything that had been happening in the past few weeks. Luca's world wasn't just about protection and rebuilding careers. It was about power and revenge. And for all his calm, calculated demeanor, I was starting to realize that this marriage wasn't just a contract. It was part of a much bigger plan, one that I was a reluctant participant in. Luca had promised me that, in time, I'd come to understand the full scope of the game he was playing. But the first hint of it came when he mentioned Alexander's name for the first time after our marriage. "We've got work to do," Luca had said one night as we sat in his penthouse, the city lights casting a dim glow through the windows. His voice was steady, almost casual, but the look in his eyes betrayed something darker. "I've already started moving some pieces into place. Alexander won't be the same after this." At first, I didn't understand. I hadn't realized how far Luca would go to exact his revenge on my ex-fiancé. But as the days wore on and I began to attend more high society events with Luca by my side, I saw the quiet, invisible steps Luca was taking to bring Alexander's world crashing down. It started small. Rumors whispered behind closed doors, strategic business deals falling apart, whispers of shady financial dealings that never seemed to stick to anyone except Alexander. The kind of whispers that started to chip away at the solid foundation he'd built. The pieces were so subtle, so well-timed, that I almost didn't notice at first. But it didn't take long for me to realize that every move Luca made, every slight, every backhanded comment, every small setback that came Alexander's way, it was all by design. Luca had orchestrated it all. And I, sitting at his side, had become an unwilling accomplice to it. Luca, though, didn't see it that way. "Alexander made his choice, Emma," Luca had said one night, his voice laced with something colder than I was used to hearing. "He chose to humiliate you publicly. He underestimated your worth. He used you, and now it's time for him to pay for that mistake." I had stayed silent, trying to ignore the tight knot of discomfort in my chest. Luca was right, of course. Alexander had humiliated me, taken everything from me in front of 200 witnesses, and cast me aside without a second thought. But the methods Luca was employing to exact revenge didn't sit well with me. It felt too personal. As the weeks went on, the news surrounding Alexander became more damning. First, it was a public scandal involving a failed business deal, an agreement he had made with an international investor that ended up costing him millions. The press painted him as incompetent, someone who couldn't manage his own empire. Then came the whispers of financial mismanagement, accusations that he'd been funneling money into offshore accounts. The accusations stuck, no matter how much he tried to deny them. The more I saw, the more my discomfort turned into something else. A strange satisfaction. Each time I saw his name plastered across the papers, each time the headlines spoke of another failed project, another ruined partnership, I couldn't help but feel a dark thrill. Alexander had taken everything from me, and now it seemed like the universe was doing the same to him. Watching his downfall unfold in real time, as Luca's influence seeped into every corner of Alexander's life, was strangely satisfying. But the more I allowed myself to feel that satisfaction, the more conflicted I became. I had never been one to play dirty. I had built my career on hard work, on respect, on integrity. But with Luca's empire, I was starting to see a different side to power, a side where the rules didn't matter, where the game was played by a different set of rules, and where you didn't just win, you made sure your enemies lost everything. I knew what Luca was doing. I understood it now, even if I didn't agree with it. Alexander had humiliated me. He had ruined everything I had worked for, and Luca was making sure that he would never recover. But at what cost? One night, after yet another gala, where I had been forced to stand by Luca's side and smile for the cameras, I found myself in the penthouse's study, pacing back and forth. Luca had already gone to bed, his business deals continuing to swirl around us like a constant hum. I stopped in front of the window, staring out over the city. I should have been grateful. I should have felt safe, secure. But all I could think about was how much I had lost in this arrangement. I hadn't just lost Alexander. I had lost myself too. Luca's voice broke through my thoughts. "You look troubled." I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his posture as composed as ever. His sharp eyes assessed me, but there was something softer in his gaze, something almost protective. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I agreed to this deal to rebuild my life, but now I'm starting to wonder if I've become part of something I don't understand." Luca didn't move, but his presence filled the room. "You think I don't understand what you're going through?" His voice softened slightly, though the hardness never left. "I've built my empire from the ground up. I've had to make sacrifices, to bend the rules, to get to where I am. If you want to survive in this world, Emma, you have to play the game the way it's meant to be played." His words stung, but I couldn't deny that there was truth in them. I had chosen to be here. I had chosen to accept the deal, knowing what it meant. And now I was seeing the cost of that decision. I sighed, my shoulders slumping. "I'm not like you, Luca. I don't want to play games like this. I just wanted my life back." Luca stepped forward, his gaze never leaving mine. "You have your life back, Emma. You have your freedom, and if you want to keep it, you'll need to trust me. Trust that I know what I'm doing." I didn't say anything in response. I wasn't sure I could. The truth was, I was starting to respect Luca, not just for his power, but for his conviction. He didn't hesitate. He didn't second guess. He had a purpose, a goal, and he made sure it was achieved. And as much as I hated to admit it, I was starting to see how that kind of power could be intoxicating. The following weeks were a blur of meetings, gala appearances, and business dinners. But beneath the surface, the manipulation of Alexander's world continued. The more I saw it unfold, the more I began to understand why Luca had taken this route. This wasn't just about me. It was about a man who had wronged him in the worst way possible. And now, Luca was making sure that Alexander would never rise again. It was hard to stay detached when I saw how deeply Luca's world ran. His empire wasn't just about money, it was about control. And as I sat by his side, watching Alexander's empire crumble before him, I couldn't help but wonder what Luca was really after. Revenge, power, or something else entirely. I wasn't sure yet. But as Alexander's life spiraled further out of control, I knew one thing for certain. I had become an unwilling part of a much bigger game, and there was no turning back. As the pieces fell into place and Alexander's fall from grace became inevitable, I couldn't help but feel the tension building between business and personal emotions. I wasn't sure where the line between Luca's empire and my own feelings began, but I was about to find out the hard way. Time had a strange way of slipping through my fingers in Luca's world. It felt like just yesterday that I had walked into his penthouse, filled with apprehension and doubt, only to be met by the chilling certainty of my new reality. Now, weeks later, I was still here, still bound by a contract I had agreed to, 6 months of pretending to be his wife, living in his world, watching as Alexander's life crumbled under the weight of Luca's influence. But as much as I had tried to keep my emotions in check, I couldn't deny the way things were changing. Luca wasn't just my business partner anymore. He wasn't just the man who had helped me salvage my reputation and rebuild my career. Something had shifted between us, something I couldn't easily explain or ignore. The tension between us had grown over time. I found myself paying attention to the subtle way Luca moved through the world, his power, his confidence, and the way he seemed to have control over every situation. There were moments when I caught him looking at me in ways that made my stomach flutter, moments when I wondered if he felt the same pull I did. But then the logical part of my mind kicked in, reminding me that this wasn't a real marriage. There were no real emotions involved, just business. Still, there were moments, small moments, that made me question the nature of our relationship. The way Luca's hand would brush against mine when we walked into a room together. The way his eyes softened just a fraction when he spoke to me, when no one else was around. But then there were moments that reminded me of the vast divide between us. We were attending another high society event. This one more intimate than the previous gala. Luca's arm was around my waist, pulling me close to his side as we navigated through the crowd. It was an event meant to celebrate new investments in his business, with some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the city gathered in one room. I wasn't sure what I was doing here, or why I was standing next to Luca as if we were a couple. "How are you enjoying the evening?" Luca's voice pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to look at him, my chest tightening at the way he was looking at me. He was still the same Luca, controlled, distant, his gaze unwavering. But there was something in the way his lips curled just slightly, something in the way his hand rested on my lower back that made me feel uneasy. "It's fine," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "I'm just getting used to all of this." I gestured vaguely to the crowd, feeling out of place. The world Luca moved in was so different from mine, filled with power, ambition, and ruthless calculations. "You'll fit in eventually," he said, his words quiet but assured. "You're already doing better than I expected." I raised an eyebrow, unsure if he was teasing or being serious. Is that supposed to be a compliment? Luca's eyes flickered, and for a moment, there was a hint of something in his gaze, a softness that I hadn't seen before. "Maybe," he replied, his voice more thoughtful than I expected. "But you're stronger than you realize, Emma." His words hung in the air, and for the first time, I saw the man behind the powerful facade. There was vulnerability in his tone, something raw that he rarely allowed anyone to see. It was fleeting, but it made me pause. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of small talk, introductions, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Luca was in his element, moving through the crowd with ease, his every word measured, his every gesture purposeful. I was by his din, playing my part, his wife, the one who was supposed to fit into this world and make it look effortless. But the longer I spent in this strange artificial existence, the more I found myself questioning everything. The next few days were quiet. Luca was busy with his usual meetings, his empire constantly expanding in the background. He had built this world around him, a world where he was untouchable, a world that I was slowly becoming a part of, whether I liked it or not. One evening, as I walked through the penthouse, I found myself stopping in front of the grand piano in the corner of the living room. It was beautiful, sleek, polished. the kind of instrument that belonged in a concert hall, not a private residence. I had always loved music, had even dabbled in playing the piano when I was younger. I didn't realize Luca had entered the room until he spoke. "You used to play?" I turned to find him standing in the doorway, his gaze fixed on me with a quiet intensity. There was something about his presence that made the space feel smaller, as though everything I did was being observed, weighed, and calculated. But for some reason, his question made me feel less like a pawn in his game. "A long time ago," I said, shrugging slightly. "I haven't had time for it lately." Luca stepped closer, his eyes lingering on the piano for a moment before looking back at me. "You should play again." It wasn't a command. It was a suggestion, soft and almost genuine. I wasn't sure how to respond. A part of me wanted to laugh. How could I, the wife of a mafia boss, sit down and play the piano like nothing had changed? But the other part of me, this strange, softer side that I hadn't expected, wanted to pick up where I had left off, if only for a few moments of peace. "Maybe I will," I said quietly, my fingers itching to touch the keys. "But not tonight." Luca nodded, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that made me wonder what he saw when he looked at me. It wasn't just the business arrangement anymore, was it? As the days went by, the bond between us began to shift. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Luca's respect for me was evident in the way he spoke to me, less like a business partner and more like someone who maybe saw me as something more. And yet, there was still that distance between us, still the unspoken truth that this was all temporary, that we were bound by a contract and nothing more. But I couldn't deny the moments when it felt like more, like there was something deeper between us, something growing under the surface, even if neither of us was ready to acknowledge it. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of public appearances and interviews, Luca and I found ourselves alone in the penthouse. The room was dimly lit, the only sound the soft hum of the city outside. I had just come back from an event, exhausted and drained, but Luca had other plans. "You're still trying to keep your distance, aren't you?" Luca's voice cut through the silence, low and intense. He was standing by the window, his back to me, his silhouette framed by the city lights. I was caught off guard by his words, but I didn't try to hide my hesitation. "I'm trying to keep things professional," I said, not looking at him. "We agreed on this. 6 months. No strings." Luca's lips quirked into a faint smile, though there was no humor in it. "You think you can keep it that way? Keep it all business?" I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. It wasn't just the business anymore, not when we shared moments like this, small, fleeting moments where the lines between us blurred. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm trying." Luca turned, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something different in his eyes. It was brief, but it was there. A flicker of something real, something unguarded. "You're not the only one trying," he said quietly. "But the more I get to know you, the harder it becomes to keep things simple." The tension between us was thick, almost tangible. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, because in that moment, I realized that the lines had already begun to blur. We were no longer just business partners, no longer just a mafia boss and his wife. Something more was beginning to form between us, and it terrified me. But as much as I wanted to push back against it, as much as I wanted to maintain control over my emotions, I knew that this, whatever it was between Luca and me, was inevitable. And with each passing day, I was finding it harder to ignore the pull between us. Would I give in to it? Or would I find a way to keep my independence intact? The evening air was crisp as we stepped out of the sleek black car, the sounds of the city buzzing faintly in the distance. Luca's arm was firmly wrapped around my waist, his presence as commanding as ever, and yet, tonight, there was something different about him. His usual cool, composed demeanor seemed tinged with something more, something I couldn't quite place. The gala we were attending tonight was one of the most high-profile events of the year, held at one of the most exclusive venues in Manhattan. It was a glittering affair, the kind that drew the city's elite, politicians, business moguls, celebrities. The room was filled with soft murmurs, the rustling of silk and velvet, the sharp clink of champagne glasses. It was everything I had come to expect from Luca's world, elegant, powerful, and filled with people who knew how to play the game. We entered the grand ballroom, the sound of our footsteps muted by the plush carpet. The chandelier above us cast a soft glow over the room, illuminating the sea of faces dressed in the finest couture, their eyes flicking over us as we made our entrance. Luca led me through the crowd with ease, his every movement purposeful, commanding attention without uttering a word. As we passed through the throng of people, I caught snippets of conversations, some admiring, others curious. The whispers about us had become a familiar background hum by now, but tonight something felt different. The energy in the air was heavier, charged with an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. Luca's hand tightened slightly around my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt a flicker of something in my chest. The quiet tension that had always existed between us seemed to pulse more strongly tonight. It wasn't just the usual pre-event nerves. It was something more, something I wasn't entirely ready to confront. We stopped near the center of the ballroom, where a stage had been set up for speeches and toasts. I expected Luca to make his usual rounds, talking business and networking, as he always did. But tonight, he seemed to have something else in mind. "I need to speak with you for a moment," Luca said, his voice low and steady. I turned to face him, surprised by the sudden shift in his tone. He didn't give me a chance to respond, his hand gently pulling me toward the stage, his presence dominating the space as we ascended the few steps that led to the raised platform. The buzz of conversation seemed to quiet as we approached, and I felt every eye in the room shift to us. Luca stopped at the podium, his back straight, his gaze sweeping across the room. For a moment, I felt like I was standing beside a king, and everyone in the room was waiting for his command. His power, his control, was palpable. Then, with a smooth, almost imperceptible motion, Luca turned to face me, his eyes locking with mine. I wasn't sure what was happening, but the weight of the moment was starting to settle over me. The air around us seemed to thicken, charged with anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Luca's voice rang out, clear and strong, instantly silencing the room. "Tonight, I'd like to make a declaration." My breath caught in my throat. A declaration? What was he doing? I looked around, my heart racing. The room was filled with curious eyes, all focused on Luca and me. 100 questions ran through my mind, but none of them made sense. Luca reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. My stomach tightened. My first instinct was to step back, to pull away, but Luca's hand found mine before I could even think. The box opened, and the brilliant gleam of a diamond ring flashed under the lights. The room seemed to hold its breath as Luca held the ring up, his gaze never leaving mine. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. This wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Our marriage had always been a contract, a business arrangement, nothing more. "Emma," Luca's voice broke through my stunned silence. "You are not just my wife by name. You are my partner, in every sense of the word. This ring in front of all of you symbolizes not only our bond, but my commitment to you, for now and for the future." I froze. My chest tightened as his words sank in. His commitment. There it was, the line that had been blurred, the shift from business to something else, something that felt dangerously close to real affection. He was taking our arrangement, our cold, calculated deal, and making it real, publicly, in front of everyone. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I looked around the room, seeing the faces of the city's most powerful people, all of them watching us with rapt attention. It was a moment meant to cement our place in this world, to show everyone that I wasn't just a pawn in Luca's game. I was something more, something significant. The realization hit me like a wave, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Luca wasn't just playing a role anymore. He wasn't just the Mafia boss who had saved me from my own downfall. He had started to care about me. In his own way, in his own dangerous, guarded way, Luca had crossed the line. And now, I was left to figure out if I could follow him into whatever this was, or if I would walk away from the chaos we had created together. Luca slid the ring onto my finger, the cold metal sending a shiver through me. For a moment, I didn't know what to feel. I stared at the diamond, its brilliant sparkle reflecting the lights of the ballroom, and I felt a strange sense of finality. The applause around us was deafening. Luca didn't look at the crowd. His focus remained entirely on me, his hand still holding mine, as if daring me to pull away. But I didn't pull away. I couldn't. I realized, with a jolt, that I wasn't ready to walk away from him either. As much as I had fought against the growing attraction, as much as I had told myself this was nothing more than business, Luca had shown me a side of himself that I hadn't expected to see. The part of him that was vulnerable, the part that was more than just the Mafia boss. He was someone who had been hurt, someone who had a lot to lose. And now, we were in this together. As the event continued, the weight of the ring on my finger seemed to grow heavier. The world around us resumed, the conversations picked up, and the clinking of glasses echoed in the background. But in that moment, as I stood beside Luca, I realized something had changed between us. This wasn't just a contract. It wasn't just a marriage of convenience anymore. The lines had blurred. And the man who had been nothing more than a stranger at the start of this journey was now someone I was beginning to care for, whether I wanted to admit it or not. Luca's presence beside me was commanding as always, but there was something else now, something deeper, a connection, a promise, both unspoken and undeniable. And as I looked around the room, the weight of the moment sinking in, I knew that our story had just begun. The following days were a blur of celebrations, congratulations, and the beginning of what felt like a new chapter in my life. But as I navigated this strange, complicated world that Luca had drawn me into, I couldn't help but wonder, what had I really agreed to? And could I survive it, now that it had moved beyond a business deal? The air in the penthouse felt charged, heavy, as though the city outside was holding its breath. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the dimly lit skyline, but my thoughts were far from the view. They were tangled up in the dark world that Luca had pulled me into, a world I couldn't escape no matter how hard I tried to keep my distance. I had known the risks when I agreed to this marriage. I had known it would come with strings attached, dangerous ones. But now, with each passing day, I was realizing just how deep those strings went, how tightly Luca's world gripped not just him, but me as well. And the more I saw, the more I felt myself slipping deeper into something I wasn't sure I could control. The night I had been so excited about, the night Luca publicly put a ring on my finger, had been a turning point, but I hadn't fully understood the weight of it until now. His enemies were watching. And the more Luca's empire grew, the more dangerous his rivals became. Franco Versani was one of those rivals. The name was a whisper in the shadows of this world, a threat lurking in the distance, but it was growing louder. Franco had never liked Luca's rise to power, and now that I was involved, now that I was publicly tied to Luca in a way that couldn't be undone, Franco was making his move. It started with small things, a few unsettling phone calls, cryptic messages from untraceable numbers, and then, one evening, a car pulled up outside the penthouse. I had been standing at the window watching the city below when I saw the shadow of a figure moving near the building's entrance. I froze, my heart pounding. The figure wasn't familiar, but there was something about the way they moved that set my instincts on edge. Before I could turn away, the door to the penthouse opened and Luca stepped inside. He had been out with some business associates, but there was no mistaking the tension in his eyes when he saw me standing there, waiting. "I need you to stay here, Emma," Luca said, his voice sharp, commanding. "Do not leave the penthouse until I get back." His tone wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. And for the first time since we had entered this arrangement, I felt the true weight of what it meant to be married to Luca Romano. The danger, the darkness. It was no longer just something I watched from the sidelines. It was something that had infiltrated my life. "What's going on?" I asked, unable to hide the fear creeping into my voice. Luca didn't answer immediately. His jaw tightened as he scanned the room, his eyes sharp and calculating. It was like he was measuring the space for threats I couldn't see. "Franco has made his move," he said finally, his voice low. "He's targeting you, and that means it's time to escalate things." I swallowed, the weight of his words sinking in. "What do you mean, escalate?" Luca looked at me then, his expression softened for a moment, but the hardness in his eyes never wavered. "It means I'm going to make sure Franco understands the consequences of crossing me, and you'll be protected. No one will touch you." My heart raced as I processed his words. I had known the stakes of marrying a mafia boss, but I hadn't truly understood the danger until now. Luca wasn't just involved in business deals and high-stakes meetings. He was dealing with people who would stop at nothing to hurt him. And now, I was a target because of my connection to him. The realization hit me like a slap to the face. The world Luca lived in wasn't one of power and privilege alone. It was a world of violence, threats, and danger, and I had just been thrust into the middle of it. As the night wore on, I stayed in the penthouse, my mind racing. Luca had left, his presence now just a memory in the silence of the apartment. I couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped, caught between a past I couldn't return to and a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. Hours later, the front door opened, and Luca returned. His face was taut with strain, and when he saw me standing by the window, his expression softened, but only for a moment. "Did everything go according to plan?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Luca's eyes narrowed, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Nothing ever goes according to plan, Emma." I met his gaze, searching for some hint of what had happened, but there was nothing there. No relief, no satisfaction, just the same cold control I had come to expect from him. "Is it over?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Luca took a step toward me, his body radiating tension, but his hand reached out to touch mine gently. "For now, yes. But Franco won't stop. He never does. And neither will I." I couldn't bring myself to speak. What could I say? The truth was that I was terrified, not just for myself, but for Luca. He was embroiled in a world of violence, and I was being dragged along with him. I had started this journey thinking it was about rebuilding my life, about finding safety. But now it was clear. This marriage had never been just about me. It was about something much bigger. "Are you scared?" Luca's voice cut through the silence, and I looked up at him, surprised. I hesitated. "Yes," I admitted, "I am. I don't know what to expect. I don't know what I'm doing here, and I don't know what this is between us anymore. Luca's grip on my hand tightened. You're not alone in this, Emma. Whatever happens, you'll be safe. I'll make sure of it. I nodded, but the truth was, I wasn't sure I believed him. Not entirely. The next few days were a whirlwind. I found myself thrust deeper into the world I had married into, with no choice but to adapt. My life had become a carefully constructed lie, one that required constant maintenance. I attended more high-profile events with Luca, standing by his side like the perfect mafia wife. But every time I looked at him, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were playing a dangerous game, and neither of us was willing to back down. Luca's protective instincts were on full display as the days went on. He became more distant, more calculating, as he moved to neutralize the threat Franco posed. I could see the weight of the decisions he was making in the tightness of his jaw, the way he shut himself off from everyone around him. But the more I watched him, the more I realized that this wasn't just about power. It wasn't just about protecting his empire. It was about me. Luca was doing everything in his power to keep me safe, and that meant confronting enemies who would stop at nothing to bring him down. The toll it was taking on our relationship, though, was becoming impossible to ignore. We had started as strangers, bound by a contract, and now we were more than that, partners in a dangerous, unpredictable world. But even as we grew closer, even as I began to see the man beneath the mafia boss, I couldn't ignore the cost of this world on both of us. The danger continued to escalate. Franco's attacks weren't just limited to my personal safety anymore. They were aimed at Luca's empire, at everything he had worked so hard to build. Each day, the tension grew. But Luca remained unmoved, his resolve unbroken. And for the first time since I had entered his world, I began to understand just how far he would go to protect those he cared about, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had. I was no longer just a pawn in his game. I was part of it. And that realization both terrified and thrilled me. The next phase of our lives together had just begun, and with it, the stakes were higher than ever. Luca's world was closing in on us, and as the danger intensified, I realized that my life, our life, was on the line. Would I be able to survive in this world? And would Luca? The city stretched before us, a glowing labyrinth of light and shadows. The penthouse had never felt more like a fortress, its glass walls offering a panoramic view of a world that seemed distant, almost unreachable. But inside, everything was different. The walls that Luca had built around us were closing in, and I could feel the weight of the choices we had made weighing heavily on both of us. We had reached the end of the road. There was no turning back now. Luca had become a constant presence in my life. His power, control, and unwavering dedication to his empire imprinted on everything he did. But with each passing day, the stakes had grown higher. Franco, Luca's most dangerous rival, had escalated his attacks. Our enemies were closing in, and it was no longer just about protecting a reputation or a marriage. It was about survival. I had spent months trying to hold on to the fragments of my old life, trying to convince myself that I could navigate Luca's dangerous world without being consumed by it. But now, standing on the precipice of our future, I realized that the world I had entered was far more dangerous than I had ever anticipated. Luca's empire was a war zone, and I was deep in the trenches alongside him. Emma, you need to understand something. Luca's voice broke through my thoughts. I turned to face him, my heart pounding in my chest. His dark eyes were intense, focused. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about everything we've built, everything we will build. I could feel the familiar pull between us, the magnetism that had always been there, drawing us closer. But tonight, it felt different. The weight of the decision we had to make hung in the air like an invisible storm cloud. "You're asking me to decide between my old life and this world?" I asked, my voice unsteady. The question had been circling in my mind for days, but now it felt real. Too real. "You know I can't go back, right?" Luca stepped closer, his presence overwhelming as always. He didn't answer immediately, but the tension between us spoke volumes. I had seen Luca in every light: the ruthless businessman, the mafia boss, the man I had married out of necessity. But now, as we stood here, I saw the cracks in his armor. The vulnerability I had only glimpsed on rare occasions were visible in the tightness of his dome, the way his hands clenched at his sides. "Everything is changing, Emma," Luca said, his voice low and strained. "My enemies are closing in. They know we're together now, and they won't stop until they get what they want. I've fought for everything I have, but I can't fight alone anymore, not if I want to keep you safe." I stared at him, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on me. The world I had entered wasn't just dangerous for me, it was dangerous for him, too. He wasn't just fighting for control, he was fighting for me, for us. And I had a choice to make. I could leave. I could walk away, disappear into the life I had once known, leaving behind the danger, the violence, the weight of this world. But I knew the truth. If I left now, I would be walking away from Luca and everything he had become to me. The man who had protected me when I had nothing left. The man who had given me a second chance when I thought my life was over. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice shoutier than I expected. The words felt like a declaration of war. "I'm with you. Whatever happens next, we face it together." Luca's gaze softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he reached out to take my hand. His grip was strong, like a promise. He didn't say anything, but his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He had made his decision, and I had made mine. We were in this together. But as the days went by, the danger grew closer. We could feel it in the air, a thickening tension that seemed to suffocate everything around us. Luca's enemies had been biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike. And it was clear that time was running out. Luca didn't show his fear. He never did. He remained the same unflinching man I had come to know, the mafia boss with ice in his veins and fire in his heart. But there was something different now. I saw it in the way he carried himself, in the way he spoke to me, more urgently, more fiercely. The last few days had been a blur of preparation. Luca had made his moves, using every resource at his disposal to protect us. His security team had been doubled, his contacts spread thin throughout the city, and his operations had been running like a well-oiled machine. But the thing about Luca's world was that it was never fully secure. There were always new threats lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And that moment was now. It was a cold evening when the final blow came. We were in the penthouse, the usual quiet hum of the city outside, when the call came through. Luca answered it immediately, his face hardening as he listened to the voice on the other end. His eyes flickered to me, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. I knew what was happening. I knew the danger had finally arrived. When the call ended, Luca looked at me with a steely determination. "It's time," he said. "They're making their move. We can't wait any longer." My heart skipped a beat. "What does that mean? What are we doing?" Luca moved toward the door, his tone calm but urgent. "We're going to take control of this situation, once and for all. I won't let them take you from me. Not now, not ever." He was moving quickly now, his steps purposeful. I followed him, my mind racing as I tried to process everything. This was it. The moment we had both known would come eventually had finally arrived. We were going to confront the very people who had been trying to tear us apart, and this time, Luca wasn't going to hold back. The night was cold as we made our way through the back entrance of one of Luca's secure locations. It was a warehouse located on the outskirts of the city where business dealings often went down out of sight. But tonight, it wasn't just business. Tonight, it was war. Luca's security team was already in place, their presence as intimidating as ever. The atmosphere in the air was thick with anticipation, each of us aware of what was at stake. This wasn't just about protecting Luca's empire. It was about us, our lives, our future. I stood next to Luca, my hand gripping his tightly, as we moved deeper into the warehouse. Every sound felt amplified. The rustling of clothes, the echo of footsteps on concrete. It was all part of the game now, part of the life I had entered, the life Luca had brought me into, and the life I had chosen to stay in. "We do this together," Luca said, his voice low and steady. His eyes met mine, and in that moment I saw everything: his commitment, his determination, his love. "You stay close to me, and we'll get through this. Trust me." I nodded, knowing this was the moment that would define everything, the moment I had to decide if I would embrace this life, this world, with all its danger and darkness, or if I would turn my back on it and on him. The door to the main room opened, and we stepped inside, ready to face whatever came next. The confrontation was swift, as Luca had anticipated. His enemies, led by Franco's men, had underestimated us. They thought they could break us, take us down. But what they didn't know was that Luca had been planning for this. He had known they would come, and he had already prepared. In the end, it wasn't just Luca who emerged victorious. We did, together. The moment the dust settled and the tension left the air, I realized something profound. We had survived. We had faced the darkness and come out the other side stronger. As we stood there, the adrenaline of the confrontation still coursing through me, Luca turned to me, his expression softer than it had been in days. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly, as if to reassure both of us that we had made it through. "We made it," he whispered into my ear, his voice thick with emotion. "We're not just surviving anymore. We're thriving." And in that moment, with his arms around me and the weight of the world finally lifting, I knew he was right. We had made it through, together. The stakes had been high, but so had our love, our trust, and our commitment to each other. We weren't just partners in a marriage anymore. We were partners in life. And whatever came next, we would face it as one. Luca and I were no longer just bound by a contract. We were bound by something far stronger: our love, our loyalty, and our shared battles. As we stood together in the aftermath, I knew that the future we would build would be one we fought for every single day. And I was ready. Ready to face whatever challenges the world threw our way, because now I had him by my side, and together we could conquer anything.